Hi everyone, today we're diving into a really important topic, which is gender responsive budgeting, or GRB. This marks the launch of our new report, Gender Responsive Budgeting, Unlocking the Potential. And it includes views from Eastern Europe, Eurasia and the Middle East.
Joe, how do we define GRB?
Well, GRB is essentially about looking at budgetary allocations and making sure that policy decisions lead to more equal outcomes for women and men, and that any inequality is not further exacerbated. If we think about it in the current context, there's some really strong alignment with, for example, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the UN SDGs, particularly if we think about goal number 5, which is about gender equality and focuses on women and girls. So what we see is lots of different parts of the world really starting to take this whole piece far more seriously, because they can see that this is a really important tool to support them in meeting some of those UN SDG goals that they've committed to.
Yes, and the UN SDGs actually look out to 2030, and it's already 2025, so that really creates that sense of urgency. And the recent UN Gender Equality Snapshot for 2024 from UN Women, it showed that there could be potentially 137 years taken to eradicate extreme poverty for women, and that's a really dire statistic. So we really want to create environments where everybody can thrive. And I think what GRB does is it removes those barriers to equal opportunities.
Yes, it does. And it would be great to also think about, when we look at the economic benefits of GRB, what are some of the implications when we think about the economics of GRB?
Yeah, so this is actually something we talked about on International Women's Day last year at ACCA. And the recent study from the European Institute on Gender Equality showed that improvements in gender equality could increase GDP by 1.5 to 2%, which is really quite exciting, but also out to 2050, 6 to 10% potentially. And this could create the same amount of jobs as that of a mid-sized European country already. And that really shows the sort of impacts of employment that go alongside GDP.
Wow. Well, there's certainly some strong data there when we think about Europe. And we know that the International Monetary Fund has done some work here as well, and taking a look at Europe, but also Central Asia. They estimate that if gender inequality was eliminated entirely, you could see GDP growth across those regions of 10 to 15%. So some really, really significant growth that could be had if there was that sort of elimination of the existing gender inequality that we see. That being said, the implementation of gender responsive budgeting is not without challenge. So what are some of the challenges that governments and others might face when seeking to embed GRB?
Yeah, so something that we've outlined in our report is the significant challenges that GRB and governments face. And one of these is the lack of data on the impacts of gender equality on budgets. And really, governments lack the tools and frameworks to be able to address these impacts effectively.
And I suppose in addition to some of that, there can also be some institutional sort of resistance. And we have sort of, perhaps government departments or governments really looking and saying, this isn't something we've used before. We don't feel very confident in adopting this right now. So I suppose that's another element. And there's a bit of a cultural shift that has to happen around some of that for it to work.
Yeah. And there are some really effective strategies that could be employed to make sure that this goes in the right direction. So it's crucial for governments to be able to undertake training initiatives on gender analysis and budgeting techniques to be able to upskill their workforce and move towards a more gender equal society.
Yes, and countries such as Kazakhstan and Austria have made significant progress in integrating GRB into their budgetary processes. To date, Austria is actually one of the very few countries worldwide that has integrated GRB in its constitution. And the Austrian government states that GRB is an essential instrument in establishing gender mainstreaming within its government policies and also assigning clear responsibilities, which makes those government departments accountable for some of their gender policy commitments. So these are just some of the practical examples of how GRB can lead to real change in society. The clear message and the core message is really that gender responsive budgeting is essential for creating a more equitable society by acknowledging and addressing the unique needs and challenges faced by both women and men.
That's right. We cannot afford to ignore these disparities if we want a fair and just world for everyone. There is no one-size-fits-all approach to GRB, and a wide variety of initiatives in different institutions and with varying scopes are possible, with numerous and different approaches and tools ranging from relatively low to relatively high resource-intensive approaches. So examples of such methods and tools include gender impact assessments, gender disaggregated incidence analysis of the budget, and gender scrutiny of the budget. So thank you very much for your time today, Joe. We've crammed a lot in on the importance of gender-responsive budgeting. To read and discover more about our in-depth insights and recommendations, please head to ACCA's website.